Working in radio, that it had that kind of potential, but no one could have told me that it would have happened in such a relatively short time, you know.
Learned early on this was what I wanted to do. Maybe about 12 years old, I knew that this is what I'd want to do the rest of my life.
In early 1981, Soul Train looked exactly the way America expected black music to look. The dancers were polished, the fashion was expressive but controlled, the energy was joyful, romantic, and reassuring. Then Prince stepped onto that stage. He wasn't dressed to explain himself. He wasn't dressed to fit in, and he certainly wasn't dressed to ask permission. According to people who work behind the scenes, that moment created an immediate tension. Not a public argument, not a confrontation, just a shift in the room. Something felt wrong. Not because Prince lacked talent, but because he challenged the unspoken rules that Soul Train had spent a decade carefully protecting. What followed was never announced. Prince was not publicly banned. There was no statement, no explanation on air. Instead, he slowly disappeared. As Prince rose to become one of the most influential black artists in history, his presence on Soul Train quietly faded. To understand why, you have to look at a collision that began years earlier, a clash between two visions of black culture, both powerful, both intentional, and ultimately incompatible. By the late 1970s, Soul Train was more than a TV show. It was a cultural institution. Created by Don Cornelius, it functioned as a protective space for black artists at a time when mainstream television often mocked, exploited, or ignored them. The show celebrated love, rhythm, beauty, and aspiration. It offered an image of black culture that felt safe to families, churches, and sponsors. But that safety came with limits, even if they were never written down. Those limits included controlled sexuality, clear gender presentation, predictable performances, and above all, an image that could not be easily misinterpreted by hostile media. Don Cornelius believed this control was necessary. In his view, Soul Train didn't just entertain, it defended. Prince believed something very different. In 1979, at just 21 years old, Prince signed a groundbreaking deal with Warner Brothers Records. Unlike most young artists, he demanded full control over songwriting, production, instrumentation, and image. This wasn't a business decision alone. It was a philosophy. Prince believed that artistic control was survival. He did not want to be shaped, translated, or softened. He had learned early that systems protected only those who fit neatly inside them. He did not intend to fit. When Prince released Dirty Mind in 1980, the message was clear. The album was direct, intimate, and unapologetically sexual. There was no metaphor to hide behind, no attempt to reassure the listener. Even more unsettling was Prince himself. High heels, lace, bare skin, androgyny without explanation. Prince refused to define his sexuality or his gender presentation in ways that made others comfortable. For some audiences, this felt liberating. For television executives, especially those responsible for black family programming, it felt dangerous. Not because Prince was obscene, but because he was uncontrollable. Inside television spaces like Soul Train, risk wasn't measured by talent. It was measured by perception. Prince's sexuality was not playful, it was confrontational. His image was not ironic, it was sincere. He didn't soften his message for context. For a show built on reassurance, this created anxiety. Executives weren't worried that Prince would fail. They worried he would succeed without being explainable, that his presence could be weaponized by critics who already viewed black culture through hostile lenses. Prince didn't want protection. Soul Train existed to provide it. That philosophical difference became impossible to ignore. By late 1980, Prince's name began to be discussed differently, not as an opportunity, but as a complication. Would sponsors be comfortable? Would parents complain? Would critics twist the image? No one openly rejected him. Instead, caution replaced enthusiasm. Prince, meanwhile, showed no interest in compromise. He didn't negotiate wardrobe. He didn't soften performances. He didn't explain himself in interviews. He performed exactly as he was. And that, more than anything, changed how Soul Train saw him. By the time Prince fully entered the orbit of Soul Train, both sides already understood the stakes. Prince believed black artists didn't need to sanitize themselves to survive. Soul Train believed survival required careful framing. Neither side was wrong. Neither side was willing to move. What followed would not be loud. It would not be dramatic. It would not make headlines. It would be quiet. And that quiet would redefine Prince's relationship with black television forever. Prince's rise did not happen in isolation. It was shaped by a childhood that taught him very early that safety was conditional and control was everything. Long before television executives debated his image, Prince Rogers Nelson was learning how to survive in a world that did not make room for softness, ambiguity, or vulnerability. Born in Minneapolis in 1958, Prince grew up surrounded by music but not stability. Both of his parents were musicians, but their relationship was volatile, marked by conflict, emotional distance, and unpredictability. Home was loud, then silent, then tense again. As a child, Prince absorbed not just sound, but stress. He learned how quickly environments could turn hostile and how little protection authority figures actually offered. By the time he was a teenager, Prince was functionally on his own. He moved between friends' houses, slept on couches, sometimes had nowhere to go. Minneapolis winters were brutal, and the isolation he felt emotionally matched the physical cold around him. He was small, quiet, and different in ways he could not yet articulate. He did not fit the dominant ideas of masculinity around him, and he knew it. School offered no refuge. Social spaces demanded conformity, and Prince instinctively resisted it. Instead of trying to belong, he withdrew inward. Music became more than an interest. It became a structure, a place where rules were clear because he made them, a space where no one could interrupt him, correct him, or tell him who to be. He taught himself instruments obsessively: piano, guitar, bass, drums. He layered sounds in his head, imagining entire compositions before ever touching tape. This was not experimentation for fun, it was preparation. Prince was building a world where he could not be displaced. This period shaped a belief that would define his entire career. Acceptance is temporary, control is permanent. If someone else owned the system, they could always remove you from it. But if you owned the work, the image, and the process, no one could erase you. That belief followed Prince directly into the music industry. By the late 1970s, when Prince began negotiating with record labels, he was already operating from a position of psychological independence. He did not want guidance. He wanted autonomy. In 1978 and 1979, he did something almost unheard of for a young black artist. He demanded full creative control: songwriting, production, instrumentation, arrangement, image, every detail. Warner Brothers agreed. This decision instantly separated Prince from the industry norm. At a time when black artists were often packaged, styled, and guided toward what executives considered marketable, Prince rejected mediation entirely. He did not want to be explained. He did not want to be softened. He did not want to be made legible for anyone else's comfort. This philosophy was not arrogance. It was survival. Prince had learned early that systems only protected people who fit neatly inside them. He had never fit neatly anywhere, so he chose to stand outside. When his early albums began circulating, industry insiders were both impressed and unsettled. Prince was young, but he was not pliable. He did not respond well to suggestions that framed his work in terms of audience expectations. He did not discuss image strategy. He did not perform humility. He treated creativity as territory, not collaboration. That mindset set the stage for conflict long before Prince ever stepped onto a major television platform. As his music evolved, so did his presentation. Prince did not separate sound from body. Clothing, movement, sexuality, and spirituality were all part of the same expression. He wore heels, lace, minimal clothing, and did so without irony or explanation. He refused labels. He refused reassurance. For younger audiences, this was electrifying. For institutions built on predictability, it was destabilizing. By 1980, Prince was no longer just a promising artist. He was a question. What happens when a black artist refuses to perform respectability? What happens when masculinity is not stable, not easily defined, not controlled? For platforms that depended on reassurance, these questions were dangerous. Prince did not see danger. He saw honesty. When his work began intersecting with television spaces designed to present a positive image, the philosophical divide was already complete. Prince believed that art did not exist to make people comfortable. It existed to make them feel something true. He believed ownership was freedom, and freedom required discomfort. That belief was unshakable. And when it finally collided with a system that survived by managing perception, the outcome was inevitable. By late 1981, the separation between Prince and Soul Train was no longer subtle. It wasn't announced, argued about on air, or documented in press releases. It simply happened through absence. His name stopped appearing on internal schedules. His performances were no longer prioritized. Conversations that once included him began to move on without explanation. Inside the studio, this absence was felt immediately. Crew members noticed it first. Dancers noticed it next. An artist who had once been discussed with excitement was now referenced cautiously, if at all. When Prince's music became unavoidable in the wider culture, it was handled carefully, shortened, reframed, or quietly passed over. This wasn't about a single incident. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting match, no walkout. It was a pattern. Prince was labeled difficult, not because of behavior, but because he refused to be managed. He didn't adjust his wardrobe, he didn't soften his movement, he didn't explain himself to producers or reassure executives. He arrived, performed on his terms, and left. That indifference unsettled people more than defiance would have. Prince didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He didn't complain publicly. He simply existed outside the system's expectations. For a platform built on careful framing, that was destabilizing. At the center of this tension was Don Cornelius. Those who worked with him describe a man who believed deeply in control as a form of protection. To him, Soul Train wasn't just a music show. It was a safeguard. It presented black culture in a way that couldn't be easily attacked, distorted, or used against itself. Every visual choice mattered. Every performance was weighed against how it might be received by sponsors, parents, churches, and critics. Prince disrupted that logic. His sexuality wasn't subtle or symbolic, it was direct. His gender presentation wasn't playful, it was serious and intentional. His spirituality wasn't comforting, it was questioning and unresolved. He didn't offer a version of black masculinity that could be neatly explained or defended. He refused to shrink himself to fit the frame. As Prince's cultural influence grew, Soul Train's discomfort grew with it. His presence represented a risk that couldn't be controlled, not because he was reckless, but because he was autonomous. Once an artist no longer needed the platform lost leverage. By 1982, the distance was complete. Prince stopped orbiting black television entirely. He didn't protest. He didn't ask why. He turned his attention elsewhere, to albums, to tours, to an audience that didn't require explanation or approval. The irony was sharp. As his power increased, his visibility on Soul Train disappeared. This wasn't a personal feud. It was a philosophical rupture. Prince believed art should expand culture, even if it made people uncomfortable. Soul Train believed its responsibility was to protect culture by limiting discomfort. Neither position was malicious. Neither side publicly acknowledged the conflict, but the result was the same. Prince moved forward without the show. The show continued without him, and in that quiet separation, something larger shifted. Black music no longer needed a single gatekeeper. Innovation no longer waited for permission. Prince's absence became louder than his presence ever could have been. As the early 1980s moved forward, it became clear that this wasn't a temporary pause. It was permanent. Prince wasn't coming back, and Soul Train wasn't going to explain why. What followed would change not just Prince's career, but the balance of power between artists and television forever. By the early 1980s, the separation between Prince and Soul Train was no longer subtle. It wasn't announced, it wasn't debated publicly, but it was real. Prince's music was growing louder, sharper, and more confrontational, while his presence on the most influential black music television platform in America was quietly fading away. In October 1981, Prince released Controversy, an album that pushed even further than Dirty Mind. The themes were no longer just sexual, they were existential. He questioned God, identity, race, power, and desire in the same breath. The title track asked bluntly whether he was black or white, straight or gay, believer or sinner. It was not confusion, it was refusal. Prince was rejecting the need to be defined at all. For Soul Train, this was the breaking point. The show had been built to present black culture as joyful, aspirational, and legible to both black families and a cautious corporate America. Prince was offering something else entirely, complexity without comfort. He didn't reassure audiences, he challenged them. And that challenge could not be easily defended to sponsors, parents, or institutions already waiting for reasons to attack black media. Instead of confrontation, the response was avoidance. Prince was booked less frequently. When his name came up in planning meetings, it was redirected. His performances were no longer prioritized. Eventually, he simply stopped appearing. There was no public ban, no announcement, no explanation. His absence was managed so quietly that it could be denied. Prince noticed, but he didn't fight it, he didn't complain publicly, he didn't ask for reconsideration. He did what he had always done when systems became restrictive. He walked away and built something larger. In 1982, Prince released 1999. The album exploded. It didn't rely on black television to succeed. It dominated radio, clubs, and live performances. Its sound felt futuristic, urgent, and emotional. Prince wasn't asking audiences to feel safe, he was asking them to feel alive. The irony was impossible to ignore. One of the most radical black artists of the era was thriving without the platform that claimed to represent black music's center. Then came 1984. Purple Rain didn't just succeed, it redefined what success looked like. The album topped charts worldwide. The film turned Prince into a cinematic icon. His image, once deemed too dangerous for black television, became globally influential. He crossed racial and cultural boundaries without softening himself. He didn't abandon his ambiguity, he amplified it. Prince became the most visible black artist on the planet without Soul Train's approval, and that reality quietly shifted the balance of power. Artists saw that independence was possible, that ownership mattered more than access, that control over image and message could outweigh any single platform. Soul Train continued. It remained respected. It celebrated talent and joy, but it no longer defined the future. Culture had moved faster than caution. Prince had proven that black expression did not need to be filtered to survive. Don Cornelius never publicly explained the distance. He never criticized Prince, but he never embraced him either. When asked about programming choices years later, he spoke about protecting an image, maintaining responsibility, staying in a lane. What that lane was, he never clarified. Rumors circulated quietly for decades. Some insiders believed Cornelius feared Prince's androgyny would be weaponized against black men by hostile media. Others believed Cornelius saw Prince as proof that gatekeeping was losing relevance. A few suggested regret that excluding Prince hadn't protected Soul Train, but limited it. There were whispers of attempted reconciliation in later years, stories that intermediaries floated the idea of a return. Nothing was confirmed. Prince never commented. He had built his own ecosystem by then. He no longer needed validation from institutions that once hesitated to claim him. When Don Cornelius died in 2012, tributes focused on his legacy, his impact, his vision. Few mentioned Prince. The silence remained intact. When Prince died in 2016, the contrast became impossible to ignore. One had protected a system through control, the other had escaped systems entirely. The unanswered question still lingers. Was Prince excluded to protect black culture, or to protect who had the power to define it? Was the silence caution or fear? There is no official answer, only patterns, absences, and outcomes. What is clear is this: Prince was not rejected for lack of talent, discipline, or vision. He was rejected for being uncontainable. And instead of shrinking, he expanded until the world had no choice but to adjust. Soul Train shaped generations. Prince reshaped possibility. One chose safety, the other chose autonomy. History did not erase either, but it made his judgment quietly, the same way the separation happened. Prince did not need to be welcomed back. He had already proven something more dangerous than rebellion. He proved that freedom could exist outside the gate. And once that truth entered the culture, nothing built on control could ever feel the same again.